Hello everyone, and welcome to Understanding the Language of Revit Warnings for Engineers. My name is Richard Taylor with ID8 Software, and thanks for joining me today for this short 30-minute webinar. ID8 Software is all about simplifying your Revit data challenges. ID8 Software creates 5 add-on solutions to Revit. As you see there on the screen, ID8 BIM Link, ID8 Explorer, ID8 Sticky, ID8 Apps, and ID8 Style Manager. And today we're going to be focusing on ID8 Explorer, so one of the 5 applications, and we're going to be talking about how we can use ID8 Explorer to review and fix our warnings. Of course, fix in conjunction with all the Revit commands as well. So real quickly about me, if you joined the webinar a little bit earlier, you saw that this went past pretty quickly, but my background is architecture, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the original employees at Revit Technology back about 20 years ago. And then I worked for Autodesk as a product manager for about 12 years. And I have my contact information here. You can always contact me for additional questions on any of the ID8 software solutions at richard.taylor@id8software.com. And please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I always enjoy increasing my LinkedIn network, and I do post quite a few things concerning Revit and ID8 software. So if you're looking for me on LinkedIn, just make sure you have the middle initial W, because my name is both my first name, Richard, and my last name is pretty common. So a little bit about me. So today, as I said, for this webinar, this short 30-minute webinar, we're here to talk about, kind of give you a very quick overview on our solution called ID8 Explorer, but really talk about the Warnings tab or the Warnings Management feature within ID8 Explorer, and talk about that user interface. And then I'm going to show some common Revit engineering warnings, some examples of common warnings, calculated warnings, and geometric warnings. And I'm also going to solicit some feedback from you as well. And then, like I said, at any time you can type questions and I'll try to answer those as best I can. So, ID8 Explorer, if you're not familiar with it, it's an add-on application to Revit that's all about auditing Revit models. So it shows you every instance of every element within your Revit project. And it also allows you to basically search, find, and filter all of those elements very easily and quickly. So ID8 Explorer, we say it's a model browser, not a project browser, because the project browser, as you know in Revit, can have many things that maybe aren't part of your model. You could load in 100 families. They're there within your project browser, but that doesn't necessarily mean they've been used in your model. Whereas ID8 Explorer is going to show you every single instance of every element within your project. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, as we kind of talk about that in the context of the warnings management. And then also, not only can we search like the project browser in the sense of being able to search by category, family, type, and instance, but I can search on parameter values as well. So in this case, I'm looking at air terminals, and I decided to look at air terminals that are specific, that have a specific flow, and I've highlighted there, you see on the right, I've checked the ones that have, 1100, 110, 115, and 120 liters per second airflow. And you actually see the number of those air terminals as well. And so I can select on those, and basically any particular either instance property or type property I can search for in ID8 Explorer. And so about 2 years ago, we introduced our ID8 Warnings Manager into ID8 Explorer. And the Warnings Manager allows you to interact with the elements that you're reviewing. So I'm sure all of us have at some point brought up the default warnings management dialog within Revit. And that dialog is not resizable, and you can't very easily interact with the elements. Sometimes you can actually zoom to the elements, but even that's sort of difficult. And then if you need to fix or modify an element, you actually have to close the dialog and do the fix or the modification. So you're going to see that with Ideate Explorer, it's very dynamic and that you can work with those elements while the Ideate Explorer dialog is open. So Ideate Explorer allows a very simple way of addressing and reviewing warnings, and it's integrated into the overall Ideate Explorer experience. I'm going to show you how you can rank warnings. So we have either a low, medium, or high importance of warning, or you can actually hide warnings too. And then these, once you set the standards for your particular company, you can save that as a network location, and then everyone can have access to that. So just a little quick spin on the ID8 Explorer Warnings tab interface. And I'm going to be showing this obviously interactively here in a moment. But you can display the warnings. Basically, when you go to the Warnings tab, you can sort by either the warning types or by elements that contain warnings, which is really nice. You can filter on the status. So if you set the ranking to be high, medium, or low, you can filter on that particular status. You can also search for keywords, which is very nice because that's something you certainly can't do with the Revit dialog. And it's going to show you information about the elements, and once you highlight on that element, like in this case I'm highlighting on an air terminal, it's going to show you additional information about that air terminal, the type, the name, where it's located, as well as who created it and who last updated it within the central model. And then in addition to this interface, this Warnings tab, we have a Settings and Management menu, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about this, where this is where you would set your standards or the file that you're reviewing for the ranking status. And that can be, as I said, on a network drive shared with multiple projects. You also set what we call the metrics file, which is what is your threshold that you're going to be setting for allowable warnings. Because you can say, well, I'm only going to allow 100 warnings per 100 megabyte file, and anything above that, I'm going to get an alert icon. So this is sort of the background of being able to review the settings and management of these warnings. So real basic, right now within Revit, there are 915 possible warnings, and I'm sure we're probably familiar with all 915 that are defined within the Revit API. And so those 915 possible warnings, right now, when you go to the Warnings tab or the Management tab in Revit, you pull up the warnings dialog, and this will show you what particular warnings are in your model at that time. So as I said, the dialog's not resizable, and it's really difficult to sort of interact with the elements once you have that dialog open. So there are many types, as I said, 915 types of warnings, but what we've done is we've kind of organized them into sort of classifications, right? So we have common Revit warnings like identical instances, duplicate marks, duplicate type marks. We have calculated Revit warnings, which for engineers can be very important. Things like the volumes of the room overlap or the volumes of the spaces, can't calculate flow within the system, no loss defined. Then there's also geometric type warnings of modeling. So, when it comes to walls and ceilings overlap, or maybe a wall or a system misses the target, joining geometry. So, these are sort of just classifications that we've come up with. Now, one of the things at the end of this presentation, I have a survey, very quick, very easy. There's only like 4 questions. I would love to know more about what are your burning warnings when it comes to engineering. What type of things are you finding the most challenging when it comes to reviewing and fixing warnings for engineering projects within Revit? But the first thing I'd like to do is kind of take you on a quick spin and talk about the warning consequences and all of these things. Why are we doing this, right? It's important because warnings can get out of control. It's been a proven fact, even from Autodesk, that warnings can potentially impact the performance of the project. It can cause slow sync to central times. It can cause corruption potentially. And in this particular case, with identical instances, we can have incorrect schedule data. It can be model inaccuracy, the potential errors in the field, if we're counting, if we have multiple air terminals or multiple, duct systems that are counted twice. So what I'm going to do is switch over here to Revit. And today I'm using Revit 2020, the latest version of Revit, but I wanted to make a point that all of our ID8 software solutions are available on Revit 2017, 18, 19, and 20. So if you have installed any one of our ID8 software solutions, any 5, you'll notice that we install the ID8 software ribbon panel or ribbon tab. So you select on ID8 software, and here are your tools or menu. So we're going to select ID8 Explorer, and we're just in the sample advanced MEP file that Autodesk supplies. And so by default, I just wanted to give you, like I said, a quick spin of ID8 Explorer. I'm going to switch this from active view, which is telling me that there are 2,246 elements in this level 2 HVAC plan. I'm going to switch over to the entire project, and here I'm looking at all 11,915. If I wanted to expand, as I said, it's based on family. In this case, I'm sorting by category, but I can also sort by level, phase, room, space, work set, many other ways to categorize these things. But if I come down to air terminals, I'm going to go to, let's say, my metric supply diffuser sidewall. I have 96. This is the type that I have available, this 450 millimeter by 200 millimeter, and I have a number of instances. If I double click, it's going to open up the view where that exists. And if I single click, then after that view is opened, I can then highlight and basically see where that is, or I'm actually selecting it, right? So it says here one selected. So in this view, I have that selected, that sidewall diffuser. So if I wanted to search for things, just by this method, I can do that very easily. And then I also talked about how, obviously, with the query, if I select on all 96 of these, right, I could then go to the query and I might decide that, well, I want to look at these sidewall diffusers, are there different flow characteristics, So if I select on that, it looks like there are different flow characteristics, and maybe I want to look at only the ones that are 120 liters per second, and I can select just on those two, and then again review them depending on what view that they're on and so forth. So what I'm going to do now is clear the selection. So there's nothing selected here, as you see, and we're going to go back to our level HVAC 1 plan. It doesn't actually really matter because when we look at warnings, we're looking at the entire project. So I'm now going to switch the tab over to warnings, and you'll notice that right now it says I have 152 warnings. And they've been classified by my project standards or maybe my BIM manager as to what are high, medium, and low. And so this identical instances has been classified as a very high ranked warning for me. And in fact, I can filter, as I mentioned, just on high ranked warnings or just on low ranked warnings, right? In this case, I want to show all of them. There's a little arrow here. As I expand, I can now drill down to the individual elements. So there are 28 pairs of elements that have identical instances. And so if I want to find out where these are, I can then double click, and basically just like with any other item in Explorer, I can zoom in and I can sort of select that item. Now the important thing that I like to do first is review, because there are 2 elements that are duplicate here. But it doesn't necessarily mean the second element, and basically you notice the ID here. The ID of this one is a higher element ID, so it was placed after the fact. And you might think by default that, well, the second one was the one that was placed, and that's the one I want to remove. But I always caution people to really look at over here at the properties palette, because sometimes, this could go on for maybe several days before realizing that there was some duplicates. People may have filled out information. So you'll notice in this second one, I purposely made every one of these elements, I did a mark of 100 just to show you that that's, and the comments has not been filled out. But with the proper one here, which is that it does happen to be the first one that was placed, I made the mark number based on the flow and I gave it a unique value. So I started at 100 and went to 400, and then I also added the flow value to this. And I added a comment that I said verify. So you'll notice here, as I select these different ones, the ones that say verify are good. The ones that say, that there is nothing there is bad. So what I can do right here is I can actually select and remove that one air terminal as an example, right? And it says, hey, they've got duplicate mark values because there are other air terminals that also have that 100 mark. So in this particular case, I can keep doing that, but there's a faster and a better way. So what we did is we implemented this where I select on the warning, I right-click, and I can now either retain originals or retain latest. And as I said, after some review, I've decided that the original is the best, and so I want to retain them. So when you retain the originals, it puts the others into a selection set that automatically you can delete. So now I'm going to select delete, and now that particular warning, I have no high ranked warnings. You may also notice that there were two alert icons here over to the right of the display. The first one was the fact that there was a high ranked warning within my project. Now that I got rid of that, there are no high ranked warnings. The second one is a threshold that I've set. So the first thing I want to do is come over here to this one. I want to right click and I want to hide the curtain wall panels. So now I'm only looking at these. I have 121, no loss defined, and then I've got this highlighted floors overlap. Those are my warnings that I'm looking at. So if I come over to my settings that I talked about earlier, right, and I say, well, there's a threshold here. I want to set this to my firm basically says I am allowed 500 warnings per 100 megabyte file. If that's the case, then I'm allowed 159 warnings. Well, if I'm allowed 159 warnings, 121 is below that, and therefore you see that that alert icon goes away. So in this particular case, I have neither high ranked warnings or I don't have any metrics or warnings that go beyond the threshold that I've set. And then I mentioned also under the manage here, I have the ability to import, and we supply 3 warnings files. There is the no ranking one. There is the custom warning, which has all 915. And then we actually provide a default warning where we have taken what our best guess is for high, medium, and low ranked warnings. Now, I know you're going to ask me this. People always do. I've done several presentations like this at different conferences. They always say, well, Richard, tell us which warning's important. Which are the ones to remove? And it's not a cut and dry answer because it depends on what's important to your project, what you're trying to accomplish, and even Autodesk doesn't really tell you which are the most important warnings to review first. Some probably will impact performance, as I mentioned. Some will impact the actual data when you're trying to do a report or maybe construction documentation. So it really depends on the individual firm or company. So you'll notice that here I've just taken sort of a pass at what warnings I feel are high, medium, and low. So I wish there was an easier instant answer, but it is something that your firm will have to sort of review what's the most important warnings for you. Okay, this is another warning that's I think a low-level warning. It's a common warning, which is, you already saw that I got that, the duplicate type, or there's duplicate mark values, and then also duplicate type values. And this probably is not going to cause performance problems unless you have 30,000 of them. I've heard from some people that have said that they had, again, literally they had 30,000 duplicate mark warnings, and that was impacting the performance. But typically, if you have a smaller number, it's not going to impact the performance that much. But it is important for all kinds of, COBie standards and, for reporting features to be able to remove this. So in this particular case, I have a structural file here, and I have this structural framing member that has a duplicate mark. All the marks are set to be B1. Well, the first thing I can do is I can actually select all 288 of them and just remove it. Basically hit a space and then say apply. So what I'm doing is I've basically just negated that warning because I've just said, you know what, right now there are no mark. And so depending on what you're looking at, sometimes the answer is to sort of remove the warning or think about, is that even a warning? Another example might be in the sense of if you're looking at room volumes, right, and it's saying that the calculations of the room volumes are incorrect, well, maybe you don't even need to calculate the volumes. Like most cases with HVAC and heating and cooling loads, you do, but that can always be a decision that you make, is maybe you just turn that off. And in this case, what I'm doing is going one by one, and I'm changing the mark values, and then I'm refreshing the warnings list. So I could do that one by one, or I could create a schedule and make that change, or I can actually use our solution called ID8 BIM-Link to export all of the mark values and update it very easily. So again, that's a pretty common but simple warning that you might want to review. So let's go back here into my presentation. Another one, there are these calculated warnings where, in this particular case, no loss is defined. You can have inaccurate calculations. It can be inaccurate system modeling if you're doing piping or HVAC, and that could be a potential liability. So let's switch back to, again, my Revit file here, and I have this no loss defined. I'm going to expand on that, and you'll notice I have a number of 45-degree elements here. I'm going to come down to the last one, and I highlight that, and it says it's a duct fitting, and it's at 45 degrees. One of the things I really like to do is if you select one or even multiple items, there's this great tool in Revit that I use called the selection box. And what that does is it builds a 3D selection box around that element that I just selected, or elements, right, if I do multiple ones. So I can really review it here and say, oh, okay, let's zoom in on that. Let's highlight this, come down here, and say, oh, well, that's the fitting there that no loss is defined. And if I look at this information over here in the properties palette, you see there's some information here. I can now, select multiple ones. Let's just go and do 4. Here, I'll do it easy, 5. So we know that we're going to be 121. We'll move down. Got 6 selected. That's fine. So now I'm going to come over here to the loss method, and you'll notice that it's an ASHRAE table, but the ASHRAE table couldn't be found. So there's a couple ways to fix this. I can go, find the ASHRAE table, or I can select the loss method to be different. So right now I had a coefficient from the ASHRAE table. I'm going to just specify the coefficient here, and I'm going to edit this now, and I'll just do let's say 0.45. And now in that particular case, it went from 121 warnings, as you saw, down to 115. So, as I fix these, those are automatically going to get reduced. And then if I come back over to the 3D view, I'm just going to go and turn off the section box and then right click and do a zoom to fit. And then you can see the entire model there. So again, this is a real quick example of how you might do a calculation loss or a calculation warning where there's no loss defined. Another type of warning, as I mentioned, is a geometric warning where maybe elements are conflicting. And so this can have ramifications if you're doing a quantity takeoff, or maybe the display in the 3D views is a problem. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to switch back over here again. And on my warnings over here, I'm going to now look at this highlighted floors overlap. And I've got 2 elements here. And again, if I double click, it actually highlighted here in the view, you see there. And I can double click on the second one, and it's going to also highlight. But, it's hard for me to see in this 3D view. I might want to get into a plan view or something. But another thing I love is that you can use any Revit command. So I'm going to just do a control. I'm going to highlight on both of those 2 floors in this model. And I'm going to come over here to the little sunglasses, and I'm going to say isolate those elements. So now I can isolate, and I basically can see the 2 floor systems, and I can pretty quickly see that, oh, okay, well, you know what, this one right here, obviously I want to edit the boundary. And again, I'm using, Revit commands as I draw and fix these things. and that's just something you can't do with the default warnings within Revit. So here I'll use the trim and extend, and I'll pick on the two and then say, you know what, I want to fix that and not save the project. So notice now I only have those 114 with the no loss defined, that I didn't fix all of them. I just did some of them. Now that particular floor is good. And then I can come over here and reset my temporary hide isolate and go back to my 3D view that shows the entire model. So again, the process is pretty simple. It's just being able to select on the elements, fix them, do the Revit command that you need to, but it's showing you in a nice, easy to use way and sort of encapsulating all that information for you. So let's switch back over here. So I'm almost at the top of the hour. I just wanted to mention that, you know, all of this, these information about warnings and about ID8 Explorer, we have a lot of in-product and online help. We have getting started guides. I already mentioned that we're supporting Revit 26, 17, 18, 19, and 20. This was an older one. Sorry, I need to update that. So it's the last 4 releases of Revit. And that we include our default warnings ranking file. We have several to choose from, but you're going to most likely be customizing your own. And then also I wanted to highlight here, if I come over to the website and you come over to Solutions on ID8 Explorer and you go down to Videos, we've created a number of videos specifically dealing with warnings. So if we come over here to our playlist for ID8 Explorer, you have the selection of a playlist for BIM management, for Revit, but you'll notice here Warnings Manager. If I select on Warnings Manager, they're very short, 5-minute videos on how you would use warnings management within ID8 Explorer to resolve duplicate marks, to resolve floor overlapping, identical instances, and so forth. So that's why I very much would like your feedback as to what warnings are important to you, because I'd like to create some more little videos about fixing specific engineering warnings or system warnings that may be of critical value or critical need to you. So with that, I want to thank you very much. I've been looking over it on the question panel. I don't see any particular questions, but if there are, please type questions into the panel and I will address them as best I can. As I mentioned, when you exit the webinar, there'll be a very quick survey. There's only 4 questions. One of those questions is just basically what type of engineering warnings are important to you. Like I said, I really would like to know the top engineering warnings that are important to you on this call, and then I'll try to create some small webinars that are addressing those specific needs. So please ask any questions. Again, I really want to appreciate your time on the webinar today. I have the top of the hour. There's a question from Naman. Yes, when you say that, can they be added to the XML files? So yes, you can save off multiple, you can save off a new file. You can give it any name that you want, and you can decide which warnings that you want to review in that. So basically, there are 915 warnings. You're not adding any additional warnings because that's only what the Revit API defines. But the actual XML file, you can save off any name that you want that would match your particular firm standards. So I hope once compiled. That's a good question. Yes. You know what? So I think I understand the question there. So in this case, I have these no loss defined. I can come over here and I can view the warning details. Let's see, right there. And notice here, I have all these no loss defined, and then I can export that list. And so I can export that list to Excel. That was a fairly new feature because we had a number of customers asking us about that, if we could take the warnings and export them out to Excel. So the answer is yes, we've implemented that. We'd like to actually do some more in that regard, but it will give you a list of all of the current warnings that you have in your project. Okay, well, you can download a trial. Well, I guess it's a sample. A trial of ID8 Explorer, a 14-day trial on our website at id8software.com. And it's a full-featured 14-day trial. We'd encourage you, if you're not familiar with ID8 Explorer, to go ahead and download a trial and test it out for yourself. So thank you very much. I'm going to end the formal presentation here, and I appreciate your time today.